Before we get into this panel, as you recall, the last panel ended with some questions about whether there was a database that allowed racing commissioners to know about the rulings. And it was pointed out to me that Ed Martin of the RCI did create a database that's for the regulators so that a racing commissioner has, as I understand it, has free access to the rulings that he or she might be interested in. Anyway, now we move on to a different sort of panel. We call this Today's Thoroughbred, What Animal Are We Dealing With? And we want to get into some questions like, is the horse of today not capable of doing more than we ask of him? And if not, why? That sort of thing. By and large, when we make a presentation, we're looking to be backed up by science, and it gives you all some cold, hard science. However, this is a panel for speculation. The overriding statistic you see in your booklet, over the years, the average number of starts per starter in North America has decreased from about 12 in 1960 down to 6 or 6.2 in the last few years. And we wanted to talk about some aspects of that. Now, every now and then I'll hear somebody make just a blanket statement to explain it. Here's a slide that explains that the top 10 trainers in earnings in 2013 averaged only 3.47 starts per year. Now, to put that in context, it's my observation that the top echelon of trainers in earnings have probably always been beneath the national average. The first time we did this was we got back as far as 1976. The national average was about 9. The top 10 trainers, Charlie Whittingham, Laz Barrera, that group, they averaged about 7 starts per starter. So it's not alarming that the top 10 trainers of today average more than the national average. Now, one thing you hear that people just throw out as a blithe description as to why the horses make fewer starts, they blame it on the mathematics of the mega stables. This is a thing we worked out. There are 31 trainers who started at least 150 individual horses in 2013. That's not starts, that's 150 or more actual horses. They accounted for only about 7.5% of all starts in North America. Now that is significant, and I'm sure if you're a racing secretary and you're having trouble filling races, and you've got some of these top trainers on your grounds, each of them giving the courtesy to their owners to not run against each other, you probably do think it's a bigger problem than it is. But in the overall scheme, the overall national figures, if those 31 trainers doubled their number of starts in 2013 with the same number of horses, it would raise the national average only from 6.3 to 6.8. So it's a factor, but again, it's not just a blanket, oh, here's the reason horses don't start more. Similarly, I heard people blithely say that the explanation is that we're breeding more for speed. You may disagree with my conclusions, but I don't think that's true. Of the top 20 sires by earnings in 2013, 16 had strong form as runners at 1 1/8 miles or more. Even at the 2-year-old sales, where you may have the image of quick maturing sprinter types dominating, even at there, the top 20 sires of 2-year-old sales had strong form as runners at 1 1/8 miles or more. Now, this country has always been kind of ambivalent. I remember in the 1950s when I started reading The Blood Horse, the great editor of The Blood Horse, Joe Estes, was decrying the fact that we were breeding more for speed. And of course, at that time, Mr. Hancock was importing Nasrilla and Prince Quillo, and so there was a kind of a tendency in this country to believe that we're doing it wrong. It's odd that in the 1880s, that's 1880s, in that decade, the suburban handicap was created, and it made 1.25 miles the sort of overriding popular distance in this country. In that same decade, the futurity was created with all of its payments and nomination fees, raising to a purse of $40,000, by far the richest race in America. So we've been kind of speed one moment and distance the next, but I don't believe you can say that horses are making fewer starts because we're breeding for more speed. Here is another thing I often hear is, well, we push our 2-year-olds too much. Well, this shows that for the foal crop of 1948, over 50% of them raced at 2. Now that's down to 29%. So we're not pushing our 2-year-olds more. You might make the case that we're not pushing them enough. So with that as background, we've asked Todd Pletcher to kind of represent not only himself, but his echelon of his compatriots. As you know, Todd recently, within a very short time, only about 2 decades, surpassed the all-time earnings record for trainers. And Todd, I'd like to start by asking you, if you've come to in the old way was people had a thought once you got a horse fit, it was good to run him fairly frequently. Have you come to the conclusion that that's not the best way, or is there something about the horse that makes you have to space his races much farther apart?
Well, I think what we've seen over the years is that we can run our horses more frequently, but what we want to do is make sure that they run well when we do run them. So we found that over the years that the horses with a little more time between races will seemingly run consistently more well. That's kind of our target. And sometimes it's 3 weeks, sometimes it's 5 weeks, sometimes it's 6 weeks. Just depends on the individual horse. But I think over the years, as trainers have developed patterns and seen how things go, we've been able to say that our horses run better with a little more time between races.
Okay, thank you. Let me introduce the rest of the panel. Dr. Rick Arthur is Equine Medical Director of the California Horse Racing Board. Dr. Rick Sams is Director of LGC Sports Science. Dr. Mary Scollay is Equine Medical Director of Kentucky Horse Racing Commission. And Dr. Larry Bramlage is a renowned surgeon and partner at Rood and Riddle. You know, it's inevitable that when we talk about this subject, medication is going to be right around the corner. And we're talking only about legal therapeutic medications. There's been a lot of rather just sort of a lot of talk, quite a column last week saying that medication has caused this decrease in number of starts. But Todd, from what you just said, I would think that you've not made that observation. Would that be correct, that you don't think that medication is a reason that horses start less frequently?
I personally don't believe that. I don't believe that, specifically Lasix causes horses to run less, which is one of the articles I recently read.
Dr. Scollay, you've been looking at horses and paying attention to how they're cared for over your career. Do you have the thought that trainers use more medication today than they used to?
I think we have more awareness of medication. I honestly don't know historically how medication was used prior to the probably early 1990s. So I think that between testing, regulations, and philosophy, I don't know that we really know how medication was used. Maybe somebody who's been in practice for an extended period of time could comment on the evolution of medication use over time, but I think really just now we're coming to understand how it is used, at least contemporaneously.
Dr. Arthur, would you weigh in on that? Well,
I hate to admit I'm this old, but when I first started practicing, about the only thing that you dispensed was bute and Asium and Noclazone, which is Asium with a diuretic. They didn't have clenbuterol. You didn't have Gastrogard. You didn't have a lot of the medications that you have today that are commonly used. And so I do think there's a lot more medication. I don't think people were as imaginative as they are today. It was really kind of a pretty simplistic approach compared to what we see on barn searches today. It's really rather phenomenal, the number of and different medications that are in barns when you do barn searches with a drug positive, for example.
Speaking of Dr. Arthur's age, as I recall, he and Dr. Pascoe some years ago did the research that came up with the phrase exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage. Is that right?
Yes, that is. That was over 30 years ago. We used to call it bleeding back then. It was a lot simpler.
Dr. Sams, from your standpoint of testing for a number of years, do you have a sense that there's more in those samples? Again, we're talking legal stuff here. Do you have a sense that there's more medication used?
My first experience in a testing laboratory was in the late 1970s in a permissive medication state where medication was permitted to be administered on race day. So furosemide, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, corticosteroids were all routinely administered on race day. So we don't have that situation today with the thresholds for therapeutic substances.
Okay. Dr. Bramlage, I remember years ago you doing an interview for our newsletter, and you talked through how bone responds, and do you have any qualms that giving a horse 6 weeks between races creates an extra challenge for the trainer to make sure he's got the skeleton in the strongest position?
I'm going to talk a little bit about this in our talk. I mean, I think it has a lot to do not with how often you race, but with what intensity you load the skeleton. And there is a limit, and we don't really know what that limit is, and I think that's one of the things we need to figure out better is how many furlongs can a horse withstand. It's not as simple as I thought it was last year as far as levels of high-speed furlongs, but horses are remarkably durable, but they're very susceptible to cyclic loading over short periods of time. And the racehorse goes to a level that no other performance horse goes. And so just because they don't race one every 6 weeks, they've got the breeze in between, and they have to stay fit. And it's nearly impossible for a human Olympic athlete to stay peaked all year long. And the same thing's true for horses. When you get to that peak level, you're close to your level of physiology, and the wear and tear accumulates. So just because they're not starting doesn't mean that they don't have to go high speeds.
Okay, thank you. Todd, what's your, how would you describe your observations? What does a horse tell you? How do you discern that a horse is now ready? He's been out for a couple of weeks after a major race, and you're now beginning to get him back for the next target.
Well, generally our program is right after a race, we'll walk the horse in the shed row for 3 days. We'll go back to the track on the 4th day. And I'm generally looking to breeze back somewhere around 2 weeks after a race. Now, generally I'll try to target the next start and then work my schedule back from that date, but that's sort of a rough estimate. And I think you'll sort of start to get a line on, how the horse is performing in their gallops and how their first breezes are. That'll give you a lot of clues as to how they bounced out of a previous race. Looking at their overall body condition, their weight, their appetite, all those things come into play. But a lot of times the schedule is going to dictate when they run back, just because you might have a horse that's ready to run back in 2 or 3 weeks, but there might not be a race available. So there's so many different variables that are going to go into the equation. I think it's hard to narrow it down to one specific reason why you might not run back for a certain number of days.
Okay, thank you. Well, we had the discussion about whether more medication is used, and that's very difficult to tell, but would anybody like to comment on those articles and opinions that just take it for granted that medication causes the horse to take more time, either depletion or exhaustion or whatever you want to say? Does anyone want to comment on that? Well,
Go ahead.
okay, we can go ahead and take a question.
Do you want a question or do you want?
Well, we were going to take questions later, but go ahead. Yeah. Thank you, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't explain. We will have a question answer session. Would anyone else want to comment on my question or Mr. Kasner's comments?
I guess I just say from a medication perspective, and I'm going to sound like the NRA here, and I apologize in advance, but medications don't hurt, therapeutic medications don't hurt horses. The intent with which they're used can result in injury or harm to the horse. And so I think that a permissive approach towards the use of therapeutic medications opens the door for the potential for mismanagement, because there are medications that can alter a horse's clinical presentation, can fool the trainer into thinking the horse is better than it actually is. That's not to say we should necessarily take those tools away, but they have to be used very thoughtfully, and there still has to be the opportunity to critically evaluate that horse absent the effect of those medications. So medications have, I think, raised the game and the requirements for trainer proficiency, and if somebody hasn't met those requirements, horses are put at risk in a way that perhaps they weren't when fewer medications were available.
That reminds me of a conversation we had. I wish you would elaborate on, Dr. Scollay. You used the example of a guy who breezes a horse on Butte, and I believe you said that denies the trainer an opportunity to really evaluate that horse. Am I remembering that correctly?
Right. We had real concerns that one of the reasons you train a horse at high speed not only is to get him fit and condition him, but also to assess his response to the exercise. If you put a medication on board that's going to blunt an inflammatory response, does that horse cool out well because he's fine, or does he cool out well because he's been given an assist? And so I understand that the administration of NSAIDs in conjunction with a breeze is a fairly common practice, a routine practice for a lot of trainers. I think that needs to be viewed very cautiously And that requires those trainers to raise their game in terms of scrutiny of their horses. Maybe it means the next morning they take them out and jog them on the hard road after that medication is worn off to see what they've got. But they've got to understand what that medication can do and adapt their protocols to make sure they've got an accurate assessment of their horse and they aren't being misled by medication.
Okay, thank you. Larry?
Well, the comment I was going to make is a lot in line with what Mary said. All my comments have little to do with Lasix. I'm not going to talk about Lasix, that's another subject. But for the musculoskeletal system, we have a lot of medication options available that we didn't have, and many of them are good options. The place we get into problems is when people get into a pattern of injecting this horse's ankles every time he runs without knowing what's going on in the horse. And, you know, many times we'll end up seeing for one reason or another, and I'll ask, was he radiographed? Yeah, he's been radiographed and he's clean. When? 4 months ago. They'll say in March. And so you have to be astute at knowing when your horse is going off form, what's bothering him, and not fall into the pattern of just abolishing all clinical signs with your medication program and lose track of the horse. That's what I think we see. It's not that the medications are bad, and it's not that there aren't indications where they absolutely help the horse. It's whenever you get into a pattern of using them indiscriminately where we see the horses suffer.
Todd, that's an really interesting observation. How do you guard against getting into a pattern? Do you have a major contact with each of your assistants every day, and so you can guard against that phenomenon?
Well, we have a number of protocols that we have in place that hopefully guard us against that. To one point that Dr. Scollay was making is we generally don't breeze any of our horses on any anti-inflammatories, with rare exceptions. But we'll have to breeze some horses on Lasix, of course, to hopefully protect against bleeding. But as a rule, we don't try to mask anything by breezing horses on Bute or Banamine or those types of things. But one of the protocols that we have in place is we jog every horse on the asphalt before we get to the track every day, and we jog all the horses the day after a work. If they're not going to the track, we'll inspect them and jog them on a hard road, which hopefully we can catch minor things before they become major. And what Dr. Bramlage was saying was an excellent point. If we can try to be regularly rated before you do some joint injections, that obviously can prevent major issues. But I think we all understand that athletes are going to have some, and I think it's the trainers hopefully are recognizing where they become major, investigate it further. I don't think any of us can prevent injuries, but our goal is to.
Thank you. Dr. Sams, sort of changing gears here, what would you say is are the major changes in how samples are treated, how labs make decisions and so forth? And do you think that there's been a great deal of progress in the science of testing for medication?
There have been very substantial improvements in the quality of testing over the last several years, and the introduction of the uniform thresholds for therapeutic medication that was supported by the RMTC and the RCI has made a huge difference in what we're seeing in the samples. I made a couple notes here with regard to what we see in samples and the changes that we've seen just recently. About 90% of the samples show evidence for furosemide, and in those racing jurisdictions where the administration of furosemide is regulated, the distribution of concentrations that we see is narrower than it was previously. So it looks to us as if there's better compliance with the furosemide rules. With regard to the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, phenylbutazone is the agent of choice in the jurisdictions that we test. We see evidence for phenylbutazone in most of the samples that we test. If flunixin is present, it is there below the secondary threshold, and on occasion we'll see ketoprofen, diclofenac, and firocoxib, but much lower frequencies than with regard to phenylbutazone and flunixin. Corticosteroids represent the biggest change that we've seen recently. Up until a few months ago, before the thresholds for the intra-articular and systemic corticosteroids were introduced, we saw corticosteroids in perhaps 30 to 40% of the samples. Now we see almost uniform conformance and compliance with the threshold requirements. We routinely measure hydrocortisone, an endogenous corticosteroid, and in the general case, we see a several-fold increase in hydrocortisone concentration in the post-race sample compared to what it is in the pre-race sample, except in those cases where the administration of corticosteroids is not controlled, in which case we often see very substantial, if not complete, suppression of endogenous hydrocortisone concentrations. We see, we did see clenbuterol fairly frequently at low concentrations, and in out-of-competition samples, we saw clenbuterol very frequently. But with the new thresholds, we're not encountering clenbuterol any longer. The other therapeutic medications with thresholds are seen with very low frequency in the samples that we're testing.
Well, I'd like to ask Dr. Arthur and also Todd, and Dr. Arthur was a racetrack practitioner, Todd, of course, a trainer. Talk us through what you feel about the fact that over a 10-year period or something, the deck would be reshuffled, and you've got different rules. And Todd, have you ever gotten a situation where the rules changed and it impeded you from doing something that you felt very strongly was good for the horse?
I don't think I felt that way. I think the major concerns that you have as a trainer is just knowing the withdrawal times in different jurisdictions you run in. And recently New York changed its clenbuterol withdrawal time to approximately 14 days, while it was still roughly 5 days in Florida. So, if we had horses that were training in Florida that maybe were on clenbuterol, we had to be very careful about when it was withdrawn if they were getting ready to ship back to New York. So, speaking for myself, and I'm sure all trainers, none of us are looking to use any medications that we think are illegal. We just want to make sure that we know the withdrawal times on the therapeutic drugs that we are able to use. And I think as long as we all know that, we're certainly going to be careful and withdraw those in time. So it's just at a point right now where it's very confusing. Each state, can be different. You have to be very careful about the withdrawal times everywhere you run.
Thank you.
To Todd's point, the RMTC spent a lot of time and money trying to establish these withdrawal times that are associated with the uniform medication rules, and that was really the delay in getting these put out. Is that the horsemen have always complained about the need to have a bright out of bounds line, and we think we've done that. So hopefully we can avoid, inadvertent positives, which are frankly the far and away the most common positives. In fact, I'd say they're 80-90% of the positives we have to deal with as regulators are accidents and not anybody trying to take advantage of the system, even though there are always people who dance close to the fire. that you can't feel too sorry for when they get burned. But, you know, I do think that the uniform medication rules are a step in that direction. You can still manage horses that have unsoundness problems. I think the real key is that if this works the way that I think many of us hope it will, it's going to require the very serious consultation between the veterinarian, who needs to be professionally up to date on all of the pharmacological and pharmacokinetic data, to consult with the trainer so that they can decide what is the best way to treat a particular problem on a horse and stay within the rules that hopefully will be a national uniform medication program.
Let me go back to what Todd just said. I suppose it's going to get worked out where there isn't a 5-day withdrawal of clenbuterol in Florida and 14 in New York. But from two standpoints. One is, as a medical man, how do you feel about which is the best for the horse? And as an official, do you think that needs to be reconciled?
Well, I think that's what the uniform medication policy is, to reconcile and get everybody on the same wavelength. Last year, the withdrawal time for clenbuterol at the Breeders' Cup was 21 days minimum. California just passed the uniform medication rules, and if we get everything done, or the state government gets everything done, on October 1st, we'll have the same rules that apparently they have in New York now, which would be 14 days for clenbuterol, which would be the national uniform medication policy. You know, Ed Martin can address this, but talking about herding cats, when you try to herd commissions, it's been very, very difficult to get everybody on the same page. There's been a lot of opposition groups that have delayed moving forward with the uniform medication policy, but there is no question, particularly in regards to corticosteroids, that people are going to have to change the way they do business. It's going to change the way horses are treated with corticosteroids in horse racing, and actually I think for the better. But it is going to change the way business is done. But if every state signs on to the uniform medication program, then people with stables that ship around the country will be in a lot better position to stay within the rules, because particularly if they're participating in the proficiency testing accreditation program, everybody gets the same answer on the same test.
Dr. Bramlage.
I just want to, is this one on?
Yes. You can't hear.
I can't hear. I want to emphasize what Rick said and reiterate the levels at which the uniform medication rules have been set are good from the aspect of you no longer will be able to give multiple doses of corticosteroids in multiple joints just because you know there's something wrong with the horse. And then you lose track of the horse. It forces you to know where the problems is and to make the cerebral decision of this horse needs to be injected before he runs, and it's okay. He's got a problem that medication can maintain safely. And I think that's the real value of the scenario. It forces people it will, assuming when we ever get it all done, it will force people to know their horses better. And in that aspect, the good trainers will shine and the good veterinarians will shine, because you have to make the decision as to what is the item that's holding this horse back. You cannot, under the new medication rules, inject 4 or 5 joints and expect it to clear the test after a week. But if you have a pair of joints, you have the tools in order to keep that horse running at his level if that's a safe thing to do. And so I think it's a step forward in many directions.
Thank you. Rick, were you about to?
I'd just like to say, and not to pick on any industry, but in the quarter horse industry, you need to have your joint injections because you qualify for the $2 million futurity. They don't even bother looking at the horse. They just get the corticosteroids and inject 6 or 12 joints. And, you know, the fact of the matter is you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to look at the horse. You're going to have to treat him as an individual. And I think that's one of the things that certainly in our jurisdiction in California that we're putting emphasis on is that you have to medicate horses for specific conditions, and you have to treat that individual. You just can't treat all horses the same, and just because they're in and you're dropping them 2 levels, you don't do knees, ankles, and hocks.
Todd, I want to quote something that Dr. Bramlage told me years ago. It made me glad I'm not a horse trainer. He said what was optimal conditioning for the cardiovascular system wasn't the same as what was optimal for the musculoskeletal system. Therefore, a trainer with one animal is dealing with 2 phenomena. Have you ever thought in those terms of training? And if so, which one do you think is the most difficult to achieve?
I think it's, what I've always been fascinated with is if you compare horses to human track and field competitors, that it seems like we can actually get horses a lot fitter with less training than what it appears to me, and I'm no expert in that field by any means, but when you talk to some runners, the amount of training that they do, the running that they do, the miles that they put in compared to what we do with our horses, I think it's drastically different. Our routine gallop, most horses, which would generally be 5 or 6 days a week, would be somewhere between a mile and a half at roughly a 17-second mile clips. I've always been fascinated. I think you can get away with a little bit less training than you would once, especially if you get that foundation built. It's the dilemma that we deal with every day is to do enough to have perform at peak levels and hopefully to keep healthy and sound. It's a balancing act. As a trainer, comfortable with experience and try to kind of see what works, and each individual horse is going to be a little bit different.
Thank you.
Could I comment? Everybody, one of the issues I know we were going to talk about is whether horses are weaker today than they were 30, 40 years ago. And I'm personally not convinced of that. But what I am convinced of is that horses are managed very differently than they were 30 or 40 years ago. I remember when Charlie Whittingham got Cougar II up to the Santa Anita Handicap on Works. He worked him in 11 and change, 6 furlongs and 11 and change, and we talked about it for a week on the backside of the racetrack because it was such a big work. Nowadays in California, you'll see maiden 32 Cowbreds that work in 11 and change. Some horses are working as fast as they're running. A little anecdotal story, Wayne Hughes had horses with Warren Studi, an old-time trainer, who, by the way, I worked for over 30 years and never put a horse down out of a race for. And he had a horse with Bob Baffert. And he was upset with Warren worked his good filly he had with him a mile in 1:42. And the same day, Bob Baffert worked a filly for him in 57 and change, and he didn't say a word. And I said, well, Wayne, what do you think's tougher on the horse, 57 and change 5 furlongs or a 1:42 mile? And I think that there is a lot of difference in the way horses are trained. Years ago, I was looking at in fact, before this first summit, and we looked at some of this in preparation for that. I had a racing form from the early 60s. The Bullet at Santa Anita for 6 furlongs was 1:15 and change. 1:15 and change for 6 furlongs. I don't even know if they register works 1:15 and change anymore. So, horses are trained differently. There's many more works between races, and as Larry said, horses, if you want to look at it, have a certain number of furlongs that you can put in them. It doesn't matter whether you're racing or working, and there's a lot more works, a lot faster, bigger works, and by bigger I mean faster works than they used to do years ago. Big difference.
That reminds me of a comment that researcher Dr. David Nunemaker made, and Todd, this was 20 years ago, so I'm not referring to your technique at all. He said that standardbreds are trained to race, and thoroughbreds are trained to train. And I guess that comes from going to the races, the harness track, and see how much they warm up.
I think specifically Dave was talking about the cannon bone when he talks about that, because when a horse goes from breezing, let's say, or galloping to fast breezing, the most heavily loaded part of the bone shifts around the bone. And I'll show a couple of slides of this when I start talking, when I talk this afternoon. So in other words, cannon bones galloping create a different response in the thoroughbred than does the cannon bone breezing or racing. It's loaded differently. So preparing them requires a certain amount of speed. And it goes along with what, Dave used to advocate a lot of 1 furlong breezes. And, the times of the Aiken trials when the horses, they went a quarter or some sort of thing like that, those early breezes, those aren't a bad thing, because it's not so much that it overloads the skeleton, but it gives it the signal of where it's going. And I also have a slide that shows the difference between it's from Dave. So the difference between the change in a standardbred cannon bone from yearling to adult and a thoroughbred cannon bone from yearling to adult. So it's an interesting change. We require a lot more of our thoroughbreds as far as adaptation than the standardbreds.
Is that right? Thank you. Mary?
Well, I was just going to go back to Rick's comments about the changes in how the horses are managed. Obviously, I'm a big nurture, not nature proponent, and I guess the thing that I also wanted to throw out is that I think there's been an evolution in terms of the industry's and the public's expectations of how we manage these horses. When I started as a racetrack regulatory veterinarian in the mid-1980s, the definition of racing soundness was tied to performance. If a horse won a race and he limped back into the winner's circle, he didn't go on the vet's list. He may have been lame, but he beat all those other horses, so he was racing sound. You say that today and people's eyes roll back into their heads. That's just a horrible concept. The horse is lame, he shouldn't race again until we know he's not lame. The fact that he won shouldn't factor into whether or not he should be on the vet's list. So there's been a change in terms of our expectations of the condition of the horse pre-race, during race, and after the race. And I think that may also impact the decision to race, how frequently a horse races. I'm not saying that they all come out of races with varying degrees of unsoundness, but I am saying that I believe there were a lot of horses that raced in the mid-1980s and earlier that would not pass a pre-race exam right now, would not be allowed to compete, and might be spending an awful lot of time on the vet's list. So I think there's some intangibles in terms of assessing durability because our expectations of the stewardship of the horse have evolved, and I think our criteria for allowing a horse to race are substantially different than they were when I started. I mean, when I started, I would have to defend why I scratched a horse. Now I spend more time defending why I let one run. It's a real paradigm shift that has been kind of a shifting sands for some of the regulatory vets, to be honest.
Rick, that in a kind of a indirect way, that brings me back to the comment we were discussing earlier that 5% of the trainers account for 35% of the injuries. can you generalize, is that because that 5% are guys who are just struggling with the bottom horses and can't attract a better clientele? Or is it something they just aren't doing particularly professionally?
It really has to do with the aggressiveness of the trainer. And, the fact of the matter is it is not a random event whether horses go on the best list or not. There is no question that the trainer and the veterinarian know more about that horse than any examining veterinarian ever will. It really has to do, and it's consistent year from year. You get the same people who push, and that's just the reality of it. I think most people in the industry know who those people are, and oftentimes they win a lot of races, which one time justified it, and in many people's minds it still does. But it really has to do with the aggressiveness of the trainer. When I first took this position, we had a chairman named Richard Shapiro who actually wanted to publish the top 10 trainers, I guess bottom 10 trainers, in terms of fatalities on California racetracks. And once they saw the list, they didn't want to publish that.
Well, now, Todd, we can't have you here without having a little bit of fun. Tell us what you're excited about going into the Saratoga meeting.
Well, we're always excited about our 2-year-olds coming into the meet. We've appear to have some very good-looking babies that have been training well. So Saratoga's emphasizes 2-year-old racing like always. We're excited about that. And is Palace Malice still on target for the Whitney? He is. He's training really well. We're hopefully going to get 2 starts in him during the Saratoga meet, the Whitney and the Woodward. Hopefully, if everything continues to go well. But yeah, he's training super. Just really pleased and proud of him. This year, he's really developed into a top-class horse. Good, thank you. Thank you so much for participating. Now, I think we can throw this to questions of the audience. We do have an extra microphone.
Where's Kristen? She's the microphone lady.
If you have a question for anybody, now is the time.
So we look at these data on average number of starts over time. Is there any reliable data on catastrophic injuries over time, and can that data be interpreted in a meaningful way?
I'll take that one. There is no data, no credible data prior to 2007, prior to the Equine Injury Database. It is all anecdotal. Individual jurisdictions kept records, but definitions of fatalities, and that sounds obvious, but it's not. We're different. And so the 50-some-odd year span that we're looking at in terms of starts, we're really only able to examine 2008 to present as far as the occurrence of fatalities.
There's actually one exception to that, and that would be the California necropsy data, because all horses that have been necroped died within CHRB enclosures since 1991 underwent necropsies, and that data is available. Sue Stover published some of the historical data in Vet Journal a few years ago. You can find that citation in PubMed, but that data is quite reliable in terms of, and you can still get the start data and the like, and I think she's done most of that. But other than that, I agree with Mary. The real definition, when we start talking about comparing data, historically, it's virtually impossible. Some people count this, they don't count that. few jurisdictions count training fatalities. Some people don't even count the number of horses that die of colics, pneumonias, and the other reasons, which can be a substantial number. They actually hit 30% one time, and close to 30% in California. You know, the bottom line is the equine injury database has really changed how we understand fatalities. The interesting thing is that the anecdotal information wasn't nearly as good as the real information.
I think there's that we make a mistake when we equate average earnings or average starts per horse with the ability of our horses to race. In 2009, I did a presentation to the Jockey Club, and in order to try to answer this question, we looked at what percentage of the horses that are racing are 5 years old and older over time. And for all, assuming that if we had less capable horses, they wouldn't be able to last this long. And the answer was no difference. I'll show the slide later. But the biggest difference in driving, if you look at the curve that's in your book, the 2 times where the average number of starts per horse slope went down the steepest is when the foal crop went up the most. And so we're dividing the number of starts by the total number of horses. And in the 84 or something, we had a 50,000 horse foal crop. So we're comparing it to the early 50s where we had a 10,000 horse foal crop. And right now we've got, what, 22. The foal, I'm sorry, not 10,000. Yeah.
23, I believe.
Yeah, we've got 25,000 this year or thereabouts.
I think it'll be 23, I believe.
23,000. So the number of horses has gone down, but the big difference currently is the number of racing opportunities is going down with the number of horses. So it measures a lot of other things other than the quality of horse or the durability of the horse that we have. And I'm not convinced that the good horses aren't still good horses.
I'd also just insert in there that I think the reasons that horses get withdrawn from racing have become more complex in the last 10 or 15 years, in that I hear a lot of owners say, we got to get some black type on this filly, we're going to sell her in the fall. And once she's got the black type, she gets withdrawn from racing so that she doesn't have the ability to embarrass herself or diminish her value. So we've got people who breed to sell, we've got people who race to breed, and in some cases I think racing itself is becoming peripheral to other activities. I'm not saying that's broad spectrum across the industry, but I think it certainly impacts certain facets of the industry.
I'd be willing to say it's broad spectrum.
Hey, Ed, can I interject one thing quick? We're actually looking at a study that's interesting. I think it supports what Mary's saying a little bit, is since 1990, the average purse size has increased 166%. And since 1990, the average sales price of brood mares and brood mare prospects has increased 305%. So definitely think that economics play a big role, and especially in organizations, stables like mine, where you have horses that have a residual value that you're always cognizant of and trying to protect. Those purses, the purse model in racing is a little bit broken. The $15,000 training horse is $30,000. Take a horse like Palace Mouth is going to run in the Whitney for $1.5 million, which is a phenomenal purse, but it might only be 10% of his as opposed to 200% of the.
Thank you. Excuse me. Go ahead, Dr. Arthur.
Yeah, one of the things, Todd actually said something I think that is another reason why you don't get a lot of starts is he expects his horses to run well when they run, and that means you have to get the perfect spot for the horse. And I'm not saying that necessarily for him, but I've had trainers tell me their horse they wanted to get their horse out on colic because he's 5-1 and doesn't have a shot. You know, trainers don't just compete on the track in the race, they also compete for owners. And in fact, I think it was the first Welfare and Safety Summit, we tried to look at different parameters for evaluating trainers, because trainers don't like to have bad stats. Everybody wants to have a good percentage, and nobody wants to be running a 40 or 50 to 1 shot, because the perception is if you run a 40 or 50 to 1 shot, you're an idiot. And, you know, owners don't like idiots training for them. So, you know, it's a little bit of a problem, but the fact of the matter is if you have 12 horses in a field, you're going to have a 50 to 1 shot. It doesn't work any other way.
Dr. Sams, excuse me, Dr. Sams, I overlooked the question. Back when we were talking about the overall march of progress with the medication, I wanted you to comment on how you feel about the testing world. Do you have a positive opinion of the idea of consolidation and having fewer labs? And do you think that's going to happen?
Well, we've already seen substantial consolidation of laboratories. State testing laboratories have closed in a number of racing jurisdictions, Maine, Maryland, and some others, New Jersey, excuse me, in recent years. So the number of laboratories performing testing now is substantially less than it was just a short time ago. Instrumentation costs are very high. It's easy to spend $500,000 on one piece of instrumentation, and so the laboratories will have to consolidate in order to afford what is standard equipment today.
Well, we were having a discussion the other day, and there was a fear that, okay, a lab gets accredited, but then its state law says the commission has to take the lowest bid, and so the lab has the ability to do testing, but the amount it's getting paid doesn't support its best effort. Is that a worry?
That's a concern at the moment. For long term, laboratories will have to perform satisfactorily on single mask and double mask proficiency testing. And so the proficiency testing will drive the quality of laboratories. Because in order for a laboratory to stay accredited or get accredited, it will have to perform satisfactorily on proficiency testing.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions? Here's a gentleman down here, Andrew.
Thank you. With respect to medication testing, is cobalt a real problem in the industry? And why is it that it has not been diagnosed in the laboratories that are testing? And what is being done about that in the relationship to thyroid problems? Is it among a small percentage of trainers that this is a problem, or is it industry-wide?
We've actually looked, the RMTC has been working very diligently on the cobalt issue. Mary, Scollay, Rick Sams, myself. I will tell you, in California, we do have a cobalt problem in harness racing. We don't have it in thoroughbred racing. It is an issue primarily in, even in Australia, in harness horses as well. So it is a real issue. Cobalt testing is it's inorganic chemistry testing, which is different than what we typically do. In fact, even in our laboratory, we have to send our samples to the toxicology laboratory and not the drug testing laboratory. There's very few drug testing labs anywhere in the world that have the ICP-MS instrumentation to do cobalt testing. I'm happy to say from some work that Dr. Knitsch has done in our laboratory for the RMTC that it looks like it's going to be very easy to regulate. There are some, interestingly, cobalt, the international unit for EPO was set as a 5 millimole equivalent of cobalt. Before they had EPO, cobalt was used to to treat anemias in people. So, you know, it is something, it is an issue. It's something that I think you know, we're a little bit behind on, but actually Dr. Sams had a proposal in almost a year ago before this really became a big public issue, and we've been working on it since then, and I think it'll be very easy to resolve. In our state, it does not appear to be a problem in thoroughbreds, and but that doesn't mean we're not going to continue to look for it.
Other question? Mr. Ebley.
One aspect of the changes in the patterns of racing that I don't think you've touched on too much, and I'm curious about it. I well remember that in the 40s and 50s, I'm not just talking now about the number of times a horse runs, but the fact that when you would run a horse and you would want to run in a major race, they would almost, or I won't say almost always, but frequently put a prep race in, and it was generally felt, well, I won't say that, but it seems to me it was generally felt from where I was sitting that trainers and owners of horses felt that their horses needed a race before a major race. That seems to have been eradicated, and I'm just curious if that's something you found out, or if it's just a difference in what you're trying to do, or what it is.
I don't know, Todd could probably answer
Todd,
that as well as I could.
Could you hear that question from the audience, Todd?
I'm not sure I really understood it as a question as much as an observation, but I would agree. You know, we were talking about training schedules earlier, and I think when California Chrome was going for the Triple Crown this year, someone published Assault's training leading up to the Triple Crown, and the number of times that he breezed and the number of times he raced even between the Derby and the Preakness and the Preakness and the Belmont. I mean, I think you know, training has definitely changed. I wouldn't necessarily agree with Dr. Arthur that we train harder, especially if you look back at that generation in the 40s. But you know, I think it talks a little bit about what Dr. Arthur was saying in terms of statistics play a role in this, and you know, not wanting to go out there and have a horse get beat in between races or prior to the big race. And I think over the years, as training has changed, I think at one point, if everyone was running every week and somewhere along the way a guy said, hey, maybe if I skip this one and run back in 2 weeks, I'll have a little bit of an advantage with a fresher horse. So I think what we've been able to determine, or at least, you know, in my stable, is that we don't need that prep race in between. If we're going from a major race, you know, 4 or 5, 6 weeks in between starts, that we feel like they're able to have a peak performance without a race in between.
Thank you.
You know, but to answer the man's question, the original question, though, was that it used to be very, very common to give a horse a race. In other words, the horse wasn't ready to fire the first time that the horse went out. And, you know, that's very uncommon. Everybody is training to win that race that time. Charlie Whittingham was notorious for giving horses race. I remember when I was a groom, we never knew when he was going to let these horses go, because everybody knew as soon as he did they were going to win. And Shoe was the greatest at getting them in trouble where they couldn't win. But, you know, the fact of the matter is you would race a horse into fitness. And I don't know anybody that does that today. You know, I doubt if Todd would put a horse in a race that he didn't think was fit enough to at least hit the board.
Putting on your regulatory cap, what do you think about the old practice of giving a horse a race? Do you think the public was being duped, or do you think the public should have been aware that that was a practice?
Well, I think in the old days, everybody could figure out who was giving horses a race and when, but, there was a little bit of hanky-panky going on. I mean, everybody, understood that was the way it was. But, it's very interesting. Several years ago, there were two, I don't want to get too far into these stories, but there was a maiden 2-year-old filly race at Saratoga and a maiden 2-year-old filly race in California. This shows the difference between the jurisdictions. The race in California, over half of the fillies had been 6 furlongs multiple times, and all of the fillies that worked 5 furlongs had multiple 5 furlong races. In Saratoga, there hadn't been one filly that worked over 5 furlongs, and half of the fillies had only worked over 4 furlongs. So there's a difference in even different parts of the country the way horses are trained. But all of them were dead fit and ready to run, off of their form.
Any more questions? Don't get a distinguished group like this often, so.
I just think when we're looking at older data, to the point raised earlier that the fractions were slower back in, 20, 30, 40 years ago in the morning during breezes, trainers perhaps had to race a horse as a prep race to prepare them for the race that they actually really truly wanted to win in order to give the horse that advantage. Now that the horses are breezing in the morning at faster rates, then that sets them up more at a race pace that would be acceptable for the race that they're actually going to win. So again, looking at statistics and data in regards to science and how the horse is being conditioned and biomechanical ability as well should be something to consider in relationship to that gentleman's question over there.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate your attention. Oh, excuse me, another? Okay, great. Mr. Casman.
My question is directed at Dr. Sams. Dr. Sams, how much of a budget constraint do you have on your ability to really effectively test horses for anything and everything that you would want to test for? What would be your wish list? What would be your ideal scenario, budget-wise, equipment? If you were just given a free rein and asked to provide the most effective, conclusive test that you could, what would that be?
I think we have a pretty good approach to testing right now. My wish list would include some additional instrumentation and data reduction tools. It would include some more experienced analysts, and it would include a substantial research component.
To put things in perspective, one of the things the RMTC accreditation program requires is that laboratories have R&D budgets. And that's one thing that frankly, when you go to a state budget office, you put the term research there and they just cut it out immediately. The fact of the matter is, if you look at Hong Kong, which tests for about 80 days of racing, spends probably 3 to 4 times as much per test as we do in the US, or per horse tested. More importantly, they have 6 PhD chemists that do nothing but develop new tests and do R&D. And the fact of the matter is, when you chase after some of these things like ITPP or even cobalt, I mean, even getting funding for the cobalt, which is a very, very simple thing to do, it took months for us to get that all organized. We just don't have an innate research and development budget to look at the next problem. This is a cat and mouse game. It doesn't matter what we do, it's just the same thing in human sport. somebody's always trying to beat us. There's a lot of people out there. It's a very competitive sport. People are looking for ways to get around our system. We see them probing us all the time, and what we really need is an R&D budget that is really developing the new tests that we need for the new drugs. The real issue that we're going to have to start dealing with are proteomics and even gene doping and those related sort of things. That's where we really have to be prepared. There's no longer that small molecule type of testing that we are actually very, very good at. But the proteomic type of drugs are where it's going. It's the same problem they have in human sport, and it's the reason that we have to develop a robust out-of-competition testing program in horse racing. And those are the things, all the things that all of us are aware of and we're trying to work on and trying to figure out ways to organize that. Because when you talk about out-of-competition testing, you're really, it takes a national effort. You know, I call Mary to test horses for the Breeders' Cup. She calls me to test horses for the Kentucky Derby, those sorts of things. But we actually need a better system than we have. But the bottom line is you have to do research and development or you're going to get caught with your pants down sooner or later. That's just the reality of it. And the industry really doesn't have a good mechanism to fund that. It's beg, borrow, and steal wherever we can get the money to do it.
Thank you.
I'd also add that Rick's right about what's coming down the pike and how we need to be prepared to respond to it. But I would also say that in the here and now, in terms of the things that we know about, we are pursuing uniformity in terms of our rules. We have to pursue uniformity in terms of our testing, otherwise our rules aren't uniform. And so there are jurisdictions that need assistance. Funding-wise, they don't have the money to spend. The other issue is that a lot of the people that are involved in making the decision to select a laboratory don't have the experience or the qualifications to do it. I spend most of my days with chemistry, and if you would have told me that back when I was in college, I would have smacked you. And here I spend an awful lot of time with science, and I didn't think I'd be doing that. So I understand when commissioners who are businessmen and have no experience get confused and confounded by having to sort out what they want from the laboratory and how to put it in a contract that ensures that they get what they need. There's one jurisdiction that's paying $2.50 for an EPO test. You can't buy an EPO test for $2.50. So what's likely happening is that those samples are being pooled, 10 samples are put together, and for $25 you can run the test. But when those samples are pooled, if one of them is positive and 9 of them are negative, the sample is going to be diluted out to the point where that test is negative and you've missed a regulatory opportunity. Chances are the commissioners didn't know that. They saw a cost savings opportunity and they agreed with it. So the RMTC has got a subcommittee now that is working on developing a model RFP so that if you don't know anything about looking for a lab and understanding what you need, there will be a tool for you to use, because uniform rules aren't going to mean anything if we don't have uniform testing. So these guys are right about what's down the pike. The here and now, we've got a lot of fixing to do as well.
Thank you.
When we talk about the horse that we have now and how we're dealing with him, since a member of the old Graybeard Club, I'll take y'all back to another era. I was raised on the racetrack, and when I finally got out of school in the early 60s, I knew absolutely nothing about the breeding business. So I was miraculously lucky to spend the next winter and spring with Dr. McGee, who had been with Dr. Haggard since the late 30s. And one afternoon when we were driving around, I asked him innocently what the best thing that had ever happened in our world of veterinary medicine since he'd gone to work in the late 30s. And he answered right back like others maybe had asked him before, but I thought for sure he'd say antibiotics or the x-ray machine or some of the mare procedures that they did. And he said phenothiazine. Well, that took me aback. And I guess before I could ask him why, he explained it. He said when he got to Lexington and got into the practice, he said every day when he went to work, he didn't know what in the world to expect except for one thing that he knew for sure. He was going to treat 2 or 3 horses every single day for the colic. Well, if that was the case right now, I don't know if I'd ever stuck with it every day. So anyway, what happened, of course, if you stop and think about it, we stopped feeding worms and we started feeding the horse considerably better. And I'm here to say that in the 60 years since that occasion came a fact that we grow a bigger horse, we grow a stronger horse. From the pictures that you see, we're growing a much more attractive horse, by and large. But I'll also say, I'm not sure when you go right down the median of the generations, I take those Triple Crown winners in the 40s and then the Triple Crown winners in the 70s. I'm not going to call them freaks, but I'll call them outliers. And I really, really do believe that your median horse of today is much, much more of an athlete than that median horse in the 40s and the 50s. So I think when we start examining, where we're going, I think we have to stop and realize just exactly what kind of athlete we're dealing with today. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this has been a great session. Dr. Benson, if it's okay with you, let's take our break now and then have you come on at 2:45. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank Todd for taking time to participate with us. Todd, great luck at Saratoga, and thank you all.